Hey everyone, welcome to another Grimm chat, a Grimm reading update and life update on this gloomy, it's still very dark outside. So the reason I'm able to film this on a Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. is because our classes were canceled until, well, the first class was canceled until 10, but since I'm teaching back to back the same class, I decided I want to cancel the second one because I don't want to have the two classes out of sync. That would just become too confusing in terms of the teaching of them. That's the fairy tale class. So I don't teach until 11:40. So I want to take the time that I have to give you a little update on my reading and, me in general, life in general. The semester started on Monday, and so on the one hand, it's nice to have this half day. On the other hand, it makes me anxious because, for one thing, everything makes me anxious. But also the main reason is it means I won't find my rhythm quite in the same way as if everything had been normal. So, and it's sort of silly that I should even be upset about it because it's winter and we get snow here. So I'm glad that they cancel classes. On the other hand, since, my husband drives me, and I would have just canceled on my own if they hadn't canceled. I'm not going to put my, make things too difficult for us all. Anyway, let's talk about what I've been doing. The first stuff I'm going to talk about is a little out there. Well, not really out there, but it all has to do with me and my sort of self-therapy, shall we say, my self-therapy, and so I won't go into details, but I think it was the first, when I talked to my sister, I had a bit of a emotional meltdown, just for reasons, talking to your family, and it's all resolved with her, but it did kind of put me in a spiral of what is going on here with me. And one thing that I've kind of always known, but I've never really paid that much attention to, is the fact, this whole concept of highly sensitive people, so HSPs, it's become a kind of term, and connected to that, the term of being an empath. So being someone who, and whenever I read the descriptions of it, it's almost funny, or makes me laugh how closely I fit the profile of someone who tends to get easily overwhelmed by situations and other people, loud noises. Anything can throw me out of my kind of normal way of functioning. And, this could be for many different reasons. I still wonder if, I don't want to make a bigger deal of it than it is, if I'm somewhat on some kind of spectrum. I don't know, perhaps. But my issues with being sensitive to situations, it's always been a thing, but now kind of like honing in on the idea of being an empath and realizing that there is a literature about that out there, self-help. I looked around and I came up with this lady who's well known in the empath world. She kind of has written a number of books on being an empath, and this one is nice because it's like an everyday book, like 365 days of self-care. Sort of like it, even though I'm kind of holding off on how far I'm going to go with it. Then the sort of leaning into if I think about some of the headings in the beginning, are paying attention to the sacredness of time, nature, cycles of life, the solstices, tapping into the elements, which are things I like to do anyway, intellectually. So sort of holding off on whether it's connected to anything other than that. Well, because it can be conceived of as anti-patriarchal in a certain sense, anti-Western, and not anti-Western, but in the sense of I'm to a certain point, I'm okay with non-traditional ways of dealing or interacting with the world. I'm interested in them, even though I know not that much about them. We tend to absorb other people's distress, and we need to sort of work on ways of building walls so that doesn't happen as much. I think the main one is, as I see here, the heading, practicing self-compassion, and realizing that negative self-talk is unhelpful and wrong. you get into this negative spiral where you sort of say, well, I should stop being so negative. Oh, I'm such an idiot for being so negative. You know, it's like a bad infinity. And so you have to kind of break through that negativity and somehow practice true self-acceptance, or try to. It's not easy. For us sensitive types, it's not easy. It's a daily thing that I fight with. And then even talking about it right now, I'm having a hard time. Like, I don't exactly know why it's so hard, but that's where the whole self-therapy thing comes in. Yeah, and sort of the emotional overwhelm, I can sort of tell. And one thing I was thinking about is that's one reason why books, I love them and I need them in my life, but they also kind of like can wear me out emotionally. Like, if I've finished a good book that is giving me all these thoughts, I really do. The whole hangover concept is quite real, and it can sort of leave me floundering, and I need to sort of work with that too. Doesn't mean I don't want to read, but I think it means that, and I've kind of already talked about that, how sometimes I have to be careful about what I read and when I read. Anyway, life update. And so a sort of fun thing connected to the whole leaning into intuitive ways of being, I've always had an interest, a very low level interest in rocks and crystals. And here again, I think it's interesting and fun. And I got 2 books. I got The Crystals for Beginners and The Crystal Bible. I just think they're beautiful objects. And then here again, I'm holding off, but being okay with leaning into the idea that they have that they have properties that you can hold a stone and feel better for certain reasons. But, whether they really all have specifically the attributes that everyone assigns to them for everyone, it gets very detailed. I'm just looking at the Crystal Bible, and for every stone in here, every crystal, malachite is a powerful stone, but one needs to be handled with caution. It is best used under the supervision of a qualified crystal therapist. Oh gosh, it's so beautiful though. It is toxic and should be used only in its polished form. See, I'm going to learn a lot of stuff about rocks. And it's as if us humans have overlaid them and overdetermined them with all these meanings. It could be projection, it could be really true. It doesn't really matter. It's like, that's the whole point. It's like, it doesn't matter. I still want to perhaps pursue this hobby. I got a little set for my office that is supposed to kind of, it's protection. So I know that one of the ones I got was obsidian, a little tiny piece of obsidian. And it helps if you're feeling foggy or energetically congested. Well, that's good. Oh no, that's onyx on that side. This is obsidian. Helps with aura cleansing, grounding, releasing anger, resentment, protection against, that's it, protection against negative energy. So I want my office to be kind of, and is it placebo? Is it true? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. I still think it's fine. And I'm interested. I'm interested, and that's enough. Moving on now to my actual reading, not my sort of self-therapy stuff. Number of things. So the first thing I need to talk about is that I finished the first volume of Dorothy Richardson. I finished Pointed Roofs, and it was beautiful. It was quite not plot heavy, quite imagistic and dreamy, and you have to kind of figure out what exactly is going on with her relationship with a lot of people in here. Is this one man interested in her? Is the other lady jealous of her? I think. But it never rises to the surface of actual plot. And it just ends with her leaving and her... And it is very good. She's a very internally oriented person, and she's anxious about things. She's anxious about how she comes across. She's anxious about her interactions with the German girls that she's supposed to be helping with their English. So, of course, I identified with her from that perspective. I thought the writing was very strong and beautifully poetic. She has a deep affinity for music, which was very well described, and also certain aspects of German. So she's really good with the German stuff. So, she sort of cautiously... the people can be somewhat difficult, and foreign to her, what she's used to, and she is homesick for England. Yet you can tell that she also has a deep affinity for German culture, the music, the poetry, and she does have a love for it too, which is really interesting. So she's an outsider, but she doesn't mind being an outsider. That's not really a theme here. It's more like how specific people are with her and how they feel about her. It's also very female-centric, completely female-centric basically, which is refreshing. And I highly recommend it if you don't mind not very plot-driven, poetic self-reflections on life and on space and day-to-day living. I would say it takes place end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, maybe into the 20th century. I'm not quite sure of the dates here, but quite early on. And it was first published in 1915, the first volume. The second volume, which just starts right next to the first one in this 3-part edition, is called Backwater. And I think I'm going to hold off on starting it. I like how they're, even for me, a fairly quick read, because they're not that long and you just kind of you flow. It has a nice flow. So I'm putting that aside for now, and I was, looking around for things to read. Well, let me talk about the other main book that I think I'll try and do a full review when I'm completely finished. Absolutely mind-blowing, strange, delightful, definitely 5 stars, but it's a weird book. Dr. Zhivago is a weird book, and it has a lot of plot, and it has also sort of beautiful descriptions of Russian life, but it has that sweep because it's dealing with basically the Civil War, the Red Army, the White Army, and people kind of swept up in that, specifically Zhivago himself and his life. There's a lot of things that happen that are dark and sort of sad. It's a sad book, very sad, and so I'm listening to it mainly, but then I dip into it to see things, what's going on. Written, of course, in the 50s, and has a sort of very interesting history of its own. People, the CIA trying to promote it and getting him the Nobel Prize. Yeah, copyright 1957. And so a book that I kind of think about, just kind of, because it's also sort of a mid-20th century historical novel, a little bit further back, is The Leopard by Lampedusa, that I read early last year, and that I had issues with because of the way women were depicted. Whereas here, Lara is a fantastic character, and we're very interesting, not typical, not like the movie. I don't think. It's been a long time since I saw the movie, but there they kind of hone in on that relationship, and it's there, and it's really important, but I would say it's almost more like a soulmate story than a romantic one. There's a lot less sort of sensuality than even something like Anna Karenina. It's just not that type of book. It's talking about other things, even though there is a deep connection between the two characters, Lara and Zhivago, but they're not. It's not the main thing. So yeah, I was just thinking of The Leopard because it's sort of, it's a mid-20th century look back at Sicily, and this is a mid-20th century look back at not so far back, because Sicily, it's going back into the 19th century, and this is going back to the revolution. But it's a really, really interesting book, and I do highly recommend it. I think a lot of people that are on booktube would like this. It does have a lot of plot and a lot of Russian names, and you are kind of, I'm compelled to go look up and find out more about. But if you have any kind of background and know a bit more about the Russian Revolution and the Civil War that happened after, so the kind of, it took a while for it all to settle down, although, settling down meant Stalin, great. That made me sad in the beginning. I was thinking, Russian history is just such a mess. And then you settle down into the 20s and you have Stalin, and that's terrible too. I mean, the Soviet Union, terrible, fascinating, complex place. So the future doesn't look good for where they're going. And I'm not finished quite yet. It's pretty long, But actually, what will help to know, perhaps, there's a flow to it because the chapters are very short. It's broken up into lots of parts and then lots of sort of short chapters. So you don't have these long chapters, you get kind of pulled to the next part and pulled to the next thing. So I think it's a fairly swift read for especially for people who read quite faster than I do. So that's going very well and almost done. And then I was scrounging around for my next read to do, you know, what will I read as the semester gets underway. And sometimes I do this thing where I deliberately pick a book that's almost unreadable during the semester because it's just too dense and too heavy. And what do? I start reading this little mini tome, but I just am so interested in this work. Speaking of the Soviet Union, sort of. So this is Peter Weiss, German, but actually a Swedish citizen, but German heritage, German. And his father was a Hungarian Jew, but a Czech citizen. And they moved to Germany for a while in the 30s. He's born 1816 and he died in 82, so no longer with us for a while. And so this is his tome, this tome called The Aesthetics of Resistance. Yeah, he worked on this from 71 to 81. A 3-part, 1,000-page novel called, and it's all, and it's called The Aesthetics of Resistance. And so when you read the plot, it doesn't sound that exciting, I guess. Maybe for most people, even reading it wouldn't be exciting. But it is all about anti-fascist resistance, people who were anti-fascists and in Germany in the 30s. And it goes into the Second World War. And I am kind of looking at the synopsis here to sort of capture my thoughts. And I'm just going to read the sentence here. It represents an attempt to bring to life and pass on the historical and social experiences and the aesthetic and political insights of the workers' movements in the years of resistance against fascism. So yeah, the proletariat. So it's definitely kind of informed. He has a political program, and he is a socialist, perhaps even a communist of a Western European style. And so it has a strange reception. In the beginning, people thought he was too pro-Soviet Union. And then they kind of realized, no, there's something else going on here. He wants to kind of go back and do a historical analysis of the Nazi regime through the lens of true anti-fascists. And those were, back in the day, the communists. And I'll have to see when I get into the book more, how does he deal with social democrats? I mean, the problem with the Nazis is that they come into power. First of all, they get rid of all the communists, or the communists flee. I mean, if you were far left, you were out or killed or moved straight away. But then, of course, the Nazis came in and they did the same thing to a lot of people who were much less left on the spectrum. That's the thing about Nazis. You know, anyone who's not with them is against them and gets short shrift or has to conform. That's the problem with any kind of dictatorship. But because it's called The Aesthetics of Resistance, there's a lot of talk. I think it's this idea of aesthetic insight and political insight is interesting to me. The role of art and literature and plays. And he himself is a really interesting creative person. He was an artist. He worked in theater and photography. He made movies, and he's an excellent writer. And I'll say that, I mean, I haven't read that much, but I've only read the opening sort of scene, which is mind-blowingly good. It's one of the best openings of a novel I've ever read. And it's sort of close to my heart, because what he's doing there is, it's a very deep description of the Pergamon altar in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. So this huge altar from ancient Greek times. And it's exquisitely described in great detail with a lot of sort of movement verbs. Like, his German language is fantastic for someone who loves the German language. It's just fantastic. And so what's happening here is it's an interplay between the group of the young men, very young men, teenagers, who are actually observing this art. And so we get the descriptions of what they're seeing, third person, I think, and then it sort of comes out to the people themselves, and there's a sort of interaction between them looking at the work of art and talking about the work of art, and also a really interesting talk about, well, who created this work of art, the workers, the slaves, and where are they in this, where is their place in this work of art. A short kind of comment as to, is it okay that this work of art is in this museum in Berlin? So even kind of talking about, you know, the colonizing aspects of these places plundering other places for art. That is kind of given a little bit short shrift, where someone kind of says, well, it's better that it's here than that it's lost. So that kind of, but anyway, it's and this is just the first few pages. All this stuff is extremely relevant, extremely interesting, and plus it's a beautiful, fantastic work of art, extremely impressive in its scale too. I'll find a picture and put it somewhere here. The Pergamon altar in Berlin. Tell me if you've been to see it. It really makes me want to go back and see it, even though I will at some point. So it's a fantastic opening scene, and but the thing is, I don't know if I'll be able to keep up with reading this during the semester. You know, this is just kind of wishful thinking on my part, but in a way I'm glad I started my journey with Weiss. And of course, his claim to fame, and I'll link to Jack's fantastic review, which I thought was great, is this play that he wrote. The play in the 60s, he wrote a play. The short version is Maratzad, and you should all go look at Jack's review of the play, which I also haven't read and would love to read. I've heard a lot about it. So the play is called The Persecution and Assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, is performed by the inmates of the asylum of Charenton under the direction of Marquis de Sade. What a mouthful. And so it's a 1963 play that incorporates all kinds of theories of theater making. It's very layered, of course, because it's kind of convoluted. Like you have Sade in the asylum, you know, so there's a lot of meta stuff going on in the play. And it did really well, and it kind of made him famous. And apparently it got the Tony Award in the 60s. And it keeps getting put on. It's a good, I mean, it's sort of one that's current. People keep putting on this play because they're just, probably actors like acting in it. That's his claim to fame. And he himself is really interesting. I think it's interesting that he's coming at the German stuff from someone who's basically Swedish. I mean, he ended up in Stockholm. He wasn't really in the war at all. He was in Sweden already. But then apparently in Sweden, he was quite an outsider. He was, you know, the foreigner in Sweden for a long time, even though 46 he becomes a Swedish citizen. So that kind of German writer, so the exile experience is key. Moving on to what I probably will try and read during the semester, and that is the third, not in order, but in the other order, of the Rogan Macquart novels, The Kill by Émile Zola. Off to a pretty good start. This lady is sitting in her chariot, in her carriage, and saying how bored she is. A very French start. And yeah, so I think I can manage this during the semester. So that's where I'm at with all my reading and my getting ready for a busy semester. I will check in with you at some point later on, and I'll see if I can get together a more succinct review of Dr. Zhivago. We'll see if that happens. Talk to you soon, and thank you all for watching, and hello new subscribers. Ask anything. I am very open, but I'm also not that interested in Q&As, like specifically send me questions. I know maybe at some point I should, but ask anything you want, you know, under any video, and I'll try and go back and check that there are no comments that I haven't replied to, because I like to reply to all my comments. Okay, I will see you soon, and bye-bye for now.